It was near the beginning of my 7th grade year, the first week of October. My school put 7th and 8th grade kids in with the 9th and 12th graders in the same school, so I was brand new to high school. At my bus stop there was a bunch of older kids from around the neighbourhood, and especially from the apartment complex down the street. I had met a new friend called Ben, who'd moved to our town that summer from the neighbouring town. He would ask me about everyone, and I was his guide in getting him the scoop when it came to anything or who anyone was. He had met everyone by this point, except for 2 people, Max and James. James was in the grade above us, and Max was in our grade. Both of these kids hadn't always been the cleanest, friendliest, or smartest kids in the school, but I never personally disliked them, even though I wasn't friends with them. I finally told Ben about them when he asked who they were after we saw them go into the bushes with a bottle of black spray paint. They were going in to paint their heads for the day. This shows you what type of people they were. When we got onto the bus that was filled with the aroma of spray paint fumes, Ben asked me about them and I told him that they weren't very smart or clean. This went on for a couple more weeks, at least until the beginning of November. They would eventually gravitate towards other colours of spray paint, like red, green, and blue, all most likely provided by their non-concerning parents. If you didn't know, it is illegal to buy spray paint if you're under 18, and since they were both 13 to 14, then they must have gotten it from their garages at home or something. We all got used to the smell of paint on the bus, and the initial laugh my group of friends and I had when we saw that the paint on James's head had dripped down his shirt and stained it had gone away, since it had been going on for over a month. This is where the story gets interesting. One day Max and James were at their usual spot in the bushes near the bus stop. This particular spot is located on the side of my neighbour's house by the road, and our bus stop is on the intersection of 2 neighbouring roads. Anyway, James got the smart idea to go to the back side of my neighbour's house with the black spray paint can. He knelt down and covered his mouth and nose as Max watched him and egged him on. At this point I see trespassing and destruction of personal property, so I yell, "Hey, cut that shit out, James." To this, James and Max were pretty surprised as they thought they were being sneaky and no one was watching them. Then the bus came, so we all got on. They threw the can in the bushes like they did every day and followed us onto the bus. Later on that day I was talking with my friends, telling them what had happened. When I got home I told my mum and dad, and they told me to inform the neighbour before we left for dinner that night. So I walked up to the neighbour's house and knocked on the door. I tell him what I had seen earlier, and he said that he'd found a black streak of paint on his back wall. I tell him their names and where they live if he decided he wanted to go talk to them. He said he'd be out the next morning to see what they have to say. The next morning came, and the neighbour was on his front porch talking with James and Max, and in short told them to come clean and repaint the wall that evening, or he would press charges on both of them. From what I know, James and Max both got their asses handed to them from their parents, as they were the ones providing the paint, and had absolutely no idea that the batty teenagers would try to vandalise someone's property with spray paint. However, they did clean up the streak, and I thought that was that. I thought they had learnt their lesson. The next day it was raining, so my dad took me up to my bus stop in his truck to sit and wait. During this time we saw Max swiping something with his right hand at James, but not knowing what it was, we thought he was just playing around. No. It was a knife, and according to Max he'd brought it to the bus stop to stab James for getting him in trouble. And it didn't stop there. I was later informed that the neighbour had told them who had told him that they did it, and that got me thinking that he would probably have tried to stab me as well. The day goes on with an odd bus ride, as my friend tells me that Max told him he had a knife. My friend goes and tells the teacher on bus duty that Max had this knife. When second period came, I was called down to the office and was met with the chief of police, a deputy, the superintendent, the principal, and the vice principal. I told them all what had happened, and they ended up calling Ben down as well as my friend, who told on Max and James. James got off free as he didn't have a knife, but Max got sent to juvie for a multitude of different reasons. It was about a year later. We were having our school pep rally for the homecoming football game. That morning I saw the cops at James's house, and I remember I hadn't seen him at the bus stop that morning. I figured his parents had got into trouble with drugs or something, as they weren't the best of people. However, I found out that James had a hit list for that day, as well as a plan, and told a classmate about it who then told the police. On this hit list were many people, but no names were given to who he specifically wanted to go after. However, he planned on going into the school late, with a gun in his backpack. We had no security then, but we do now because of this. He was going to wait until the entire student body was in the gym for the pep rally, then would open fire. This definitely scared the shit out of me and made me think of all my surroundings a lot more, and it made me anxious around large crowds. James ended up getting sent to juvie as well. I haven't seen them since 7th grade, and I'm in 10th grade now. It's scary to think what people can plan to do. To all the school shooter victims out there, I am sorry and could not imagine how you felt and are feeling. God bless you. So, to my 2 classmates who tried to get revenge on my school by trying to stab someone and plotting to shoot up the school, let's not meet again. Ever. It's the summer of 2013. I'm 21 and have just finished my junior year in college. The second week of August, a group of my friends and I go on an 8-day camping trip. It's 7 of us in total, 4 guys and 3 girls. We're camping in a semi-remote campground in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. It was a large campground, but very few other campers were there, and there were a few filled sites near the front of the campground. But we purposefully requested a site off in the back corner so we were completely by ourselves. We had planned to go whitewater rafting during the trip on one of the days. We were hiking Mount Washington towards the end of the trip and thought maybe we'd do 1 to 2 other small hikes, with 1 to 2 days of just chilling by the lake at the campground. We'd also planned on doing plenty of drinking during the evenings. The first couple of days of the trip were fantastic. Whitewater rafting was a blast and everything was going great. So it's the evening of our 3rd day. We have a roaring fire going and we're all just hanging out at the campsite drinking and fucking around. It's around 9:30 when a dishevelled looking man suddenly walks past our site. His clothes are a bit torn and worn out, and he had messy tangled hair. He looked maybe in his mid-40s. This isn't weird though, we all just think it's another camper doing a late evening stroll around the campground. About an hour and a half later we see the same man walk past our site in the same direction. This time he is walking slower, almost with a bit of a limp. We were all pretty drunk at this point. I think one of us might have yelled something out to him, but he just ignored us and kept walking. Mildly strange, but still, it's probably just someone who wanted to take a long walk. We wrap up the night at around 1:32. The fire is dying down and we head back to our tents. I usually love sleeping while camping. I find it extremely peaceful, but for some reason I was having trouble sleeping that night. I get up to take a piss in the woods, and when I do I see a faint light maybe 50 to 75 yards ahead of me. It looked like a dim flashlight or something similar. I decide I want to go and investigate. I go back to the tent and one of my other buddies is still awake, so I tell him about it, and he gets up to join me in my investigation. When we get out there, the light is no longer there. Feeling a little unnerved, I shine my flashlight around the woods a bit. I don't see anything, so decide maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me before, and I head back to bed. Sometime later that night, I wake up to the sound of a terrifying scream. It was Sarah, one of the girls we were camping with. I jump out of my tent as quickly as possible and nearly run into her as she's running back into our site. She's still screaming. She screams that there was a man standing in the middle of the woods. Now our whole party is awake and freaking the fuck out. I try to calm Sarah down enough to get her to explain what actually happened. She says she went to pee in the woods and saw the man from earlier just standing about 15 feet from her, not moving, like a statue. We're all freaking out, yelling, screaming and making a giant commotion. I'm internally freaking out too, but try to calm everyone down enough so that we can actually do something about it. We obviously decide to get the fuck out of there. We frantically take down our tents, basically just ripping the poles out and throwing everything into the back of our cars. Then we sped out of there. It's now around 4 a.m. We're in 2 separate cars and decide to just drive away from the campsite and try to clear our heads. Eventually, around 5:30, we find a small diner that's open, so we head in for some breakfast. We all have different theories about what the hell had just happened. Some of us think that we just ran into a homeless guy who was camping out in the woods and was surprised by us, and some of the girls think that maybe he was purposefully stalking us. Either way, none of us are comfortable staying at that campground again. I head back to the front desk of the campground with 2 of the other guys. We explained what had happened, and the guys at the front desk actually seemed to believe us, but said there was definitely no other campers currently that fit the description of that guy. They were insanely nice about it though, and actually refunded most of the remainder of our stay, which astonished me. As a group, we decided that fuck it, we weren't going to let one freaky guy ruin our trip, so we found another campground a good ways away to stay in. Fast forward 2 days. We're hiking up Mount Washington. We got up really early and get to the mountain around 7:30 to start hiking up. We're a little over halfway up the mountain when we see the very same guy hiking down, though this time he looks much better. His hair isn't crazy and his hiking clothes are relatively clean. We're all just frozen. A few of us even let out a surprised scream. He just strolls past us with this massive grin. Luckily, there are enough hikers nearby that nothing could have really happened. We decide to continue hiking up anyway, since he was heading in the opposite direction, and hope we just never encounter him again. We did finish the hike and luckily didn't see him. After that though, we did decide to cut the trip a couple of days short. Looking back on it now, we've all come to the conclusion we were likely being stalked in some way. If it was just some homeless guy in the woods near the campground, what the hell was he doing hiking down Mount Washington a couple of days later? It was a pretty unnerving and bizarre experience for sure. This happened about 3 summers ago. It was the one before I went off to uni. It happened the morning of the huge solar eclipse. You know, the one Trump looked at without glasses. Anyway, my buddy had parties at his house every weekend because his parents would go away up to their cottage. The parties were basically a bunch of our guy friends smoking weed, playing beer pong and video games, with me and my 2 girlfriends. I live in the same neighbourhood as my friend, just a couple of blocks away. Usually 1 or 2 of the guys would walk us back to my house at the end of the night, since they lived near me and didn't want us to walk alone in the dark, but this particular night we chose to Uber because we were too intoxicated to walk home. We were really drunk, so my recollection of this story isn't crystal clear regarding all that was said. So our Uber pulls up to my friend's house. It was a minivan and was around 3 a.m. Me and my 2 girlfriends walked up to the Uber to get in. We were still holding our coolers in our hands as we were too gone to realise. I opened the door to the back seat and the driver immediately gave off really weird vibes. He looked at me and had this look on his face, an almost Kubrick stare-esque look, but sort of smiling too. He had long black hair in a ponytail, a beard, and was wearing a neon yellow tracksuit. He also had some type of European accent, but I couldn't tell where he was from. I'm Slavic, so I know it had to maybe be Portuguese or Italian or something, because it didn't sound familiar to me. He looked at me and did the elevator with his eyes, saying, "I like your shirt," and winked. For starters, I was 17, and this man seemed to be in his late 20s, early 30s. Second of all, I barely had much of a shirt on. I remember I was wearing a low-cut top, so my boobs were obviously out. Again, I was really drunk, so I just brushed it off and laughed. Me and my friend sat down in our seats, and the driver turned back and said to us, "If we get arrested, you guys are going to jail," gesturing at our open drinks. Again, we were really gone and didn't really give a fuck, so we just laughed, and my friend Sarah said something along the lines of, "Don't worry, we'll be low-key." So he set off, and I noticed that at the stop sign where I would usually turn left to go home, he turned right. He had a GPS with him, but was clearly ignoring it. I thought he was maybe just cutting through the neighbourhood a different way, so I just went with it. I know the area really well. There's like 5 alternative routes back to my place. Suddenly I noticed that we've ended up on the main road, the complete opposite direction of my house. As we headed through an underpass, I turned to my friends and said, "Guys, he's going the wrong way." I looked at my friend Grace, who ordered the Uber, thinking she might have put the wrong address in, or even her own instead of mine by accident, and she flashed me her screen. She had my address as the drop-off point. I guess the Uber driver caught onto us, turned around and said, "Do you guys want me to take you to the school?" We all looked at each other confused. No, we want to go home," Sarah said. "But all the kids I drive want to go to the school. You know, the big parking lot. That's where I take them," he said with a creepy look on his face. We knew what school he was talking about. It was our high school just up the road. It's conveniently located in the middle of a huge field, by the way. "I take all the kids there," he emphasized. I remember the looks of horror on my friends' faces. "No, drop us at home, now," Sarah demanded, even though we were still driving down the main road. There was a 24-hour grocery store coming up, so I panicked and yelled, "Drop us off at that grocery store right now." He glared at me in the rearview mirror and turned into the plaza. He dropped us off at the grocery store and we didn't even think of looking back to see him drive off. We just ran inside to safety. Or so we thought. Minutes later, as we're pacing down an aisle, trying to order another Uber. We live in the suburbs, so finding an Uber at 3 a.m. isn't always easy or quick. We see the Uber driver walk past our aisle. I don't think he saw us, but we immediately made a run for it. He then saw us and began to follow us. Soon enough, he made his way to us, closer and closer. We pretty much sped through almost every aisle trying to get away from him. Grace got a notification that a driver was on his way to pick us up, and he was like 2 or 3 minutes away. We decided to go wait at the front of the store, still inside, by the exit doors. Roughly 30 seconds later, the man comes up to us with a bewildered look on his face. He says, "You girls want me to drive you home?" We all went pale. "No, don't worry about it, we have a ride," Grace said. "No, it's okay, I can drive you guys home," he insisted. "No," I said, "we have a ride, it's on its way." That seemed to anger him. "What? You ordered another Uber? What about me?" he said. He was standing very close to us too. I don't remember his face completely as I was so high. My eyes were barely open, but I remember the smile he had on his face the entire time he was with us. That eerie, nasty smile. "We have a ride," Sarah snapped. The man walked away. The Uber was 1 minute away, but it seemed to be stuck at the red light at the intersection to get into the plaza we were in. We were watching the map on the Uber app on my friend's phone in complete fear. This felt like the longest couple of minutes of my life, and I was scared as hell. We turned around to see if the Uber driver had left the store, but there he was, about 15 feet behind us, standing very close to the one cashier who was standing by a display. The poor kid looked really uncomfortable, but we saw that the driver kept constant eye contact with us as he was talking to the cashier, pointing at us several times. Suddenly we saw our new Uber pull up in front of the store. We sprinted out of the store, not looking back, and hopped in the car. I yelled, "Drive!" and locked the doors. The new Uber driver gassed it and we were on our way home safely to mine. He asked us if we were all right, since we were clearly being frantic. We explained the story and he told us to report it as soon as we got home, and he would file a report or witness statement too. He even said he would stay in front of our house until we get inside to make sure we were safe. We thanked the man. We were so scared that the previous Uber driver would follow us, as he had my address from when he was driving us earlier. I made sure we locked all the doors and windows once we got inside. I put the security alarm on and we reported the incident to Uber via email. The next morning we woke up to 5 missed calls from Uber and an email apologizing, refunding our trips from that night, and a statement saying the driver will be pulled off the road from Uber whilst they investigate. We even had an hour-long phone call that afternoon with Uber recounting the entire situation in detail. We never heard back from Uber after that regarding the creepy driver, but I hope to never see him again. What's really creepy is that a few months ago, a younger girl I work with, she was 16 at the time, told me a creepy guy was hitting on her and making her feel uncomfortable one night when she was closing down at the smoothie bar we work at. She described him as early 30s and wearing a neon yellow tracksuit. I felt my stomach drop. I immediately asked, black hair, beard, accent, was he wearing a low ponytail? She shuddered and said yes. I still get chills thinking about this man. So creepy yellow tracksuit Uber driver. Let's not meet. So this happened when I was 19 or 20. I'm 31 now and rarely drink or go out anymore. But last weekend, a friend of mine who I hadn't seen in a couple of years asked me to go out, so we ended up going to a club on the same street where the story takes place, and it reminded me of it. Legal drinking age in Brazil is 18, so people here start partying pretty early, and let's face it, no one really knows their limits when they start drinking. My friends and I had gone to this club. I honestly can't remember the name of it right now, but I know it closed down a couple of years back. We had a great time and the sun was coming up as we were leaving. Most clubs here give you a credit card when you walk in, where you can either put in the money you planned on spending, or they work as a personal digital tab where bartenders add up what you're drinking and you pay for it on the way out. It was the end of the night and I'd paid for my drinks, so I sat outside to wait for my friends, who were taking a long time to get out, probably due to being so drunk. As I'm sitting there, I notice a car across the street. There are two dudes in the front seats and another trying to make this clearly drunk out of her mind girl get inside their car. She's mumbling, stumbling and struggling to keep her eyes open, and she's saying, "No, I don't want to go," over and over while shaking her head. She was clinging onto the car door as the guy keeps telling her to let go and get inside, that they're just going to a friend's apartment to drink some more. It'll be fun, come on. I watch, wondering if I should do something as no one else is seeing this happening. I look at the club's security guard. He looks at me and shrugs, like it's not his responsibility. I look back at the girl and I'm really uncomfortable with what's happening, but I'm also scared. My friends are still nowhere to be seen and I'm alone apart from the security guard, who is clearly not going to do anything. There's these three guys. What if they decide to try and get me too? The girl says one more time that she doesn't want to go with them, and before I realise what I'm doing, I'm getting to my feet and shouting, "Hey!" The guys stop trying to push the girl into the car for a moment and look at me. "She says she doesn't want to go, dude," I say, starting to make my way across the street, even though my hands are shaking and my voice is probably not the most convincing. "She's our friend, she's just drunk and being cranky. It's all good, we're just going to take her home," he says. He seems a bit nervous and not exactly angry, which makes me feel a bit better and less scared. "Do you know them?" I ask her, and she just shakes her head, no, using the door as support to keep herself on her feet. Creep 1, the one who was trying to push her into the car, looks at me, then to his friends, who seem frustrated. They start saying, "Come on man, let's go, just leave it." Creep 1, now looking a bit pissed, grabs the girl and pushes her towards me before getting into the car, and they all leave. The girl nearly falls on her face, but I grab her and we walk back to the front of the club. My heart now slowly goes back to its normal rate. Only then I realised my friends had come out and were watching everything from across the street with confused faces. We all meet random people at clubs, at the door and walking down this street, so they probably thought I'd met someone. I start asking her what happened, if she's alone, where's all her stuff, and she's an incoherent mess, mumbling about losing track of her friends and her purse, and she doesn't even know how she paid her tab to leave. I ask for some help from the security guard. He says he can't leave his spot and he can't do anything. I explain what happened to my friends and they talk to the hostess about it, who begrudgingly goes and checks the lost and found. Her purse is thankfully there, minus the money she had in her wallet, and we manage to call her parents. I talk to her mum because the girl can't explain anything, and I promise to stay there until the mum comes to get her. 30 minutes later the mum arrives, and I've never seen someone look so relieved and terrified at the same time. She thanks me and my friends profusely and offers us a ride home, but as we lived in the next town over, she just drives us to the subway station. In the middle of all the craziness, I forgot to exchange numbers with any of them, so I've never heard of that girl or her mum again, but I hope she learned to be more careful with how much she drinks, or who she talks to in clubs. Also, shame on her friends for not looking out for her, or trying to find her when they realised she was missing. Though maybe they were all just as drunk as she was. Who knows? I know what I did was probably a bit reckless, but I wouldn't be able to just watch that car drive away and live with myself. Please be safe when going out, people. And creeps at nightclubs who try to take advantage of intoxicated people. Let's never meet again. Me and my best friend, both 22-year-old females, recently spent 3 months backpacking around Europe. We had lots of strange encounters, but this one takes the cake. We had checked out of our hostel and decided to make our way to the international train station to wait for our night train. We had to take 1 or 2 trains to get to the big train station from where we had been staying, and it was in a relatively isolated area with just highways and a gas station nearby. We prefer to get to train stations or airports early to get our tickets and make sure we don't miss our journey. Also, we don't like walking around with our bags for hours. We had a 5-hour wait for the train, so we were both sitting on a bench just passing time on our phones. Around an hour after we'd arrived at the station, a police officer came to us and asked us what we were doing. I politely explained that we were waiting to board the night train. He asked to see our tickets, and I said that we don't have tickets, just our rail passes. He looked at our passes and told us we still need to buy tickets. I thought he meant reservations, as some trains require pass holders to pay a reservation fee, though I had researched the train we were catching and it did not require any reservation. He told us to come with him, so we gathered our bags and followed him to the ticket office. He told the clerk that we wanted to purchase 2 tickets to Bucharest. I explained that we didn't need tickets and that our final destination was Budapest. He wouldn't listen and kept insisting we purchase tickets. Finally, the lady in the ticket office looked at our passes and printed us something like a seat assignment. This seemed to satisfy him. The officer told us that we needed to wait in a different area since we were catching the night train, so he took us to a closed-off room with some chairs and told us to stay there. He left and we both breathed a sigh of relief, thinking the interaction was over. It's really scary being in a foreign country and having a police officer yell at you. We thought we might be stuck in Turkey and not be able to leave the country. We started watching a movie on my laptop to pass the time. About an hour after, we went to the new waiting room. The same officer comes in and tells us we have to move again. He says to follow him, so we do. He starts asking questions like, "What are you doing in Turkey, and how do you know each other?" etc. Questions any border control would ask. He escorts us back to the outside bench we had been sitting on originally, and he asks to see our passports and tickets for the second time. So we show them to him. He points out at which terminal our train will leave from. He stands by us asking questions for a few more minutes and then leaves. This happens 2 or 3 more times. He comes and tells us we have to move again and asks the same questions, then looks at our passports. At this point, we are terrified that we are going to be detained and not make our train. It's nearly time to board our train, so we decide to head over to the terminal. On our way there, he intercepts us again as we were about to get on the escalator. He grabs my arm, hard. I look to my friend, horrified. He looks at my friend and tells her to go on ahead and points at the escalator. She gets on the escalator. What else could she do when an officer with a gun gives you an order? He waits until she gets a distance away, all the while gripping my arm. Then he looks at me and says, "Are you on Instagram?" I'm stunned. I say yes and give him my Instagram username. He asks me to type it into his phone, so I do. He lets go of my arm and then wishes me a good trip. I finally reconnect with my friend and we run to get on the train and find our seats. I'm in tears at this point. The whole day has been so scary. I thought we were being flagged as suspicious for getting to the train station early, when all the while it was just some creep trying to chat me up or something. He became a follower on Instagram and sent a message request along the lines of, "What's up, remember me?" I blocked him. My friend asked why I gave him my Instagram at all, and I told her I just wanted the interaction to be over and for him to let me get on the train. This was about 6 years ago. I'm female and was in my mid-20s. I lived with my sister and her boyfriend at the time. Their bedroom was next to mine, that was near the front door. One day I was in my bedroom watching movies on my laptop. It was early afternoon and I had my dogs in the room with me. They are medium to large dogs, mixed working breeds. I heard the front door creak as though it had been opened, but didn't think much of it as I often leave it unlocked, and thought the wind had blown it open. The wind, I realise now, that was non-existent. I continued to watch my movie and my dogs were insistent that someone was in the house. They were incessantly sniffing at the crack between the floor and door. I ignored them for another few minutes before deciding I should get up and check. I opened the door and my dogs ran straight out from my bedroom into my sister's. I followed them, thinking maybe one of them, my sister or her boyfriend, had come home. Just then I saw an unknown man in his 50s, maybe 6 foot, regular build, standing at my sister's cupboard. My dogs were sniffing him all over. I stopped still and continued to stare. In the back of my mind I did consider he was robbing us, but I pushed that aside and tried to think of how I may know him. My dogs at that point knew something was up and they both left him and stood beside me, one on either side, overly focused on the man. One dog, who is deaf so doesn't growl, was in his ready position, head down but neck stretched out, tail straight. Every step I took, they took with me, not moving an inch away from me. Eventually he said, "I'm in the wrong house. I didn't steal anything." I asked him to leave then, and he offered for me to check his bag, insisting he hadn't stolen anything. I checked his bag and I asked him to show me his pockets. He patted them down and pulled them out as far as they'd go. I said he could leave and even said goodbye. I kind of felt sorry for him at that point. Anyway, I called some friends because I thought the situation was somewhat exciting. They didn't see it that way and suggested I call the police. I followed their advice, and when taking my statement they told me the same guy broke into 2 houses earlier, and when they caught him he had become aggressive and said he had a knife and ran at them. They also said he'd stolen a laptop which was in the bag when I checked it. I felt bad that I didn't get it back for them. I am certain the only reason I had such a polite interaction with him was because I had my dogs with me. It was the only difference between me and the other 2 people. One of the others was female too. So, man who broke into my house, I hope we don't meet again. Well, maybe not in those circumstances. I do think he was just a guy down on his luck. He has a bunch of previous charges, including assault. But who knows his situation? When I was 16, I spent my summer walking almost every single day. I was constantly moving. One of my favourite spots to walk was Mount Albion Falls, and it used to take me roughly 2 hours to get there. I didn't enjoy walking through the city, so I always took the rail trail. There were different elevations you could enter it depending on the area of the city you're in, since it was built beside an escarpment. I typically entered the trail at Kenilworth Street, and had to take stairs that the city had built in to be able to access it, or else I'd be hiking up through a steep forested area. Once at the top, above street level and below the top of the escarpment, you could choose to go left or right. Going right, the trail would start levelling downwards and would get you to street level, but to get to the falls I turned left, which eventually levelled upwards, leading to the very top. I'm not great at explaining it, but it's a pretty unique trail. If anyone else from Hamilton reads this, feel free to explain it better. My walk to the falls was typical. I passed a few joggers and people on their bikes enjoying the day. The falls were as beautiful as ever, and I stopped for a while to take it all in, until I decided to head back before dark. I hated walking that trail at night. I was, and still am, afraid of the dark. I decided I'd likely jog my way back instead of walking through the city or taking a bus. At this time there didn't seem to be people on the trail, since there were no lights, unless you get close to the stairs. Most normal people, unlike myself, planned to be gone before sunset. Up in the distance I could see there was a person on the trail, just standing there. Much like myself, their skin was fair and gave off a sort of glow as the sun was going down. Right where they were standing, the trail branches off into the park, and you can access the mountain brow where there are homes. I figured, although creepy, maybe they were waiting for someone. I decided I would walk instead of jogging and remained cautious. As I got closer I made out that it was a male with white hair and looked to be roughly in his early 60s. His eyes were fixed on me as I inched closer, but he was still a ways away. I realized his behavior was extremely sketchy, because he was looking around and honestly, he just didn't look like he had good intentions. I just knew I couldn't walk by this man. It was either run the opposite direction, bad idea, run through the forest to get to the park, or run by him. I chose running into the forest, but instead of running to the park, I quickly hid at the edge so that I could still see him. He looked around, then ran towards the park where the trail branched off. That was my opportunity to run as fast as I could, so I did. Eventually I decided to look back, and I saw him standing where he originally was and staring at me. He didn't look happy, but I felt safer knowing I had passed him. I was in amazing shape and knew he wouldn't be able to catch up, but I ran the rest of the trail to the stairs anyway. Once away from the trail and in the city, it hit me how scary the whole situation was. That was the scariest encounter I have ever had in my life. I burst into tears, wondering what could have happened to me. Back then I didn't even have a cell phone. My family didn't know where I was, and the whole thing was enough to keep me off the trail for years. Creepy rail trail man, I hope someone makes you feel as small and scared as you made me feel. Let's not meet again.